The little girl had only 3 months to live. What the mountain man did next left her in tears. Dust swirls down a lonely frontier street. A church bell tolls. A weather-worn mountain man pushes open the doors of a country hospital, only to meet a bald little girl in a wheelchair. The doctor whispers she's got 3 months at most. But with steady eyes, the girl pleads, "Show me the mountains before I die." The mountain man's throat tightens. Against all warnings, he nods. Soon a mule cart rattles out of town, elders cursing him, the girl crying out, "If I die in the mountains, I'll die seeing God's world, not these gray walls." Snow falls, wolves howl, and just when hope flickers, a darker shadow rises. Greedy men with railroad papers ready to tear the land away. Now, with a child's life in his arms and a valley under threat, the mountain man must choose between surrender or sacrifice. Can a dying girl's voice move hardened hearts? Or will the mountains become her final grave? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. Through the hospital's thin walls, Robert heard the muffled coughs of children inside. The sound tugged at something deep in his chest, a feeling he thought he'd buried years ago along with Sarah. He stood before the whitewashed building, his calloused hands still dusty from trading furs in town. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the worn wooden steps leading to the entrance. The creak of the door echoed in the quiet hallway as Robert stepped inside. The sharp smell of carbolic soap mixed with medicine made his nose twitch. His boots, usually so sure on mountain trails, felt heavy and awkward on the clean floor. A series of coughs drew him toward a room at the end of the hall. Through the doorway he saw 2 girls, one small figure standing, and another seated in a wooden wheelchair by the window. The seated girl turned at the sound of his footsteps, and Robert found himself looking into eyes that held wisdom far beyond their years. "Mister?" The little one spoke first, barely tall enough to reach his elbow. "Are you lost?" Before Robert could answer, the girl in the wheelchair spoke. "He's not lost, Rhea. He's a mountain man. Look at his buckskins." Her voice was clear and steady, despite her frail appearance. The sun through the window highlighted her bare head, and Robert noticed how thin her arms were as she adjusted herself in the chair. "Name's Robert," he said, his gruff voice softening without his meaning it to. "Was just bringing some furs to town." The older girl nodded, studying him with those knowing eyes. "I'm Sasha. This is my sister Rhea." She gestured to the small girl who had moved protectively to stand beside the wheelchair. "Do you really live in the mountains?" Robert shifted his weight, unused to conversation with children. "Reckon I do. Got a cabin up near Thunder Pass." Sasha's face lit up at this, and for a moment the sickness seemed to fall away from her features. "What's it like up there? Can you see forever from the top? Are there eagles?" Before Robert could respond, footsteps approached from behind him. "Ah, I see you've met our Sasha," a tired voice said. Robert turned to find a man in a white coat, the doctor, he assumed. The physician's kind face was etched with lines of worry. "Dr. Wilson," Sasha said. "Robert lives in the mountains. He can tell me what it's really like up there." The doctor's expression flickered, and he gestured for Robert to step into the hallway. Once out of earshot, Dr. Wilson spoke in low tones. "Sasha's been with us for several months now. The illness," he paused, choosing his words carefully. "We're doing what we can, but I don't expect her to see winter. 3 months at most." The words hit Robert like a physical blow. He glanced back at the room where Sasha sat entertaining her little sister with some kind of hand game, their quiet laughter drifting into the hall. "Does she know?" Robert asked, his voice rough. The doctor nodded. "She's a remarkable child. Understands more than most adults would. Never complains, just keeps looking out that window toward the mountains." Robert felt something shift inside him, like spring ice breaking up on a frozen river. He walked back into the room, drawn by a force he couldn't name. Sasha looked up at him, and suddenly the question came, clear and direct as mountain air. "Will you show me the mountains before I die?" The room fell silent. Robert heard Rhea's sharp intake of breath, saw the doctor freeze in the doorway, But Sasha's gaze never wavered, those eyes holding his with a quiet determination that reminded him of Sarah. Words failed him for a moment. He thought of his solitary cabin, the dangerous trails, the 1,000 reasons why it was impossible. But looking at Sasha's face, bright with hope and shadowed by time he couldn't give her, Robert found himself nodding. "Yes," he said simply, and watched as joy transformed her face. "Really?" Rhea bounced on her toes, looking between Robert and her sister. "We can really go see the mountains?" "Now hold on." Dr. Wilson stepped forward, concern evident in his voice. "Sasha's condition dash." "Please," Sasha interrupted, turning to the doctor. "You said yourself there's nothing more you can do here. I don't want to spend my last days looking at these walls." Robert recognized the steel in her voice. It was the same tone Sarah had used when she'd made up her mind about something. He found himself speaking before he'd fully thought it through. "I know these mountains better than any man alive," he said to the doctor. "Got a good sturdy wagon. Could make it comfortable for her. Take it slow and careful." Dr. Wilson ran a hand through his graying hair, looking between Robert and Sasha. "It's not just the travel. She needs regular medicine. Proper care." "You could show me what to do," Robert said, surprising himself again. "I ain't no doctor, but I've treated plenty of injuries in the wild. Good with my hands, and I pay attention." Sasha's fingers gripped the arms of her wheelchair. "Dr. Wilson, please. I need to see them. Just once. Before—" She didn't finish the sentence, but her meaning hung clear in the air. The doctor's shoulders sagged slightly. "Let me think on it overnight. We'll need to discuss proper preparations, medications." He looked at Robert. "And I'll need to know more about you, mister." "Just Robert's fine," he said. "I'll come back tomorrow morning. Bring references from the trading post if you need 'em." Sasha beamed at him, and Robert felt something warm spread through his chest, something he hadn't felt since Sarah died. "Thank you," she said softly. Rhea had moved to hold her sister's hand, and the sight of them together, one standing protective and strong, the other seated but somehow stronger still, stirred memories Robert had thought long buried. "Much obliged," he said gruffly, tipping his hat to hide the moisture in his eyes. "I'll be back at first light." As he turned to leave, Rhea called out, "You promised." Robert paused in the doorway, looking back at the sisters. "That I did, little one. That I did." The setting sun painted the hospital walls gold as Robert walked back to where he'd left his wagon. His mind was already working through the modifications he'd need to make. Extra padding for the seat, a canopy for shade, secure spots for medicine. Part of him wondered what he'd gotten himself into, but when he remembered Sasha's eyes lighting up at the mention of eagles, he knew he'd made the right choice. The mountains rose blue and distant against the darkening sky, and for the first time in years, Robert found himself eager to share their secrets with someone else. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, he had a promise to keep and a wagon to prepare. Robert hadn't taken 3 steps from the hospital door when he felt a small tug on his buckskin sleeve. Looking down, he found Rhea's earnest face turned up to his, her small fingers gripping the worn leather. "Mr. Robert, she wasn't joking," Rhea said, her voice trembling slightly. "Sasha really wants to see the mountains more than anything. She watches them every single day from her window." Robert knelt down to the child's level, noting how her clothes, though clean, were well worn and slightly too big for her small frame. "How long you two been here at the hospital, little one?" Rhea's face scrunched up in thought. "Since winter, but we've been in town longer than that, since Mama and Papa." She swallowed hard, her chin quivering. "Since the fever took them 3 years ago." The words hit Robert like a physical blow. He glanced through the hospital window where he could see Sasha still sitting in her wheelchair, staring out at the distant peaks. The setting sun cast long shadows across her thin face. "The ladies from church bring us food sometimes," Rhea continued, her words tumbling out faster now. "And Mr. Jenkins at the general store lets me sweep his porch for penny candy. But mostly it's just me and Sasha, and now she's getting weaker," and her voice broke off in a hiccup. Robert felt something shift in his chest like an old wound breaking open. He'd walked away from plenty of hard things in his life, but somehow he couldn't walk away from this. Standing up, he straightened his shoulders and headed back inside. Dr. Wilson was in his office, reading through a thick medical journal by lamplight. He looked up in surprise as Robert's shadow fell across his desk. "What would it take?" Robert asked without preamble. "To move her safely, I mean." The doctor removed his spectacles, rubbing his tired eyes. "Moving her could kill her faster, you realize that? The strain on her body, the mountain air. And what's this air doing for her?" Robert gestured at the stuffy room. "Keeping her alive just to watch life pass by through a window?" Dr. Wilson's face tightened. "You think I haven't considered—" He stopped, taking a deep breath. "I've treated Sasha for months. Watched her grow weaker despite everything we've tried. The stale air in here." He glanced around the room as if seeing it with new eyes. "You're right. It's killing her slowly." "Then let me take her," Robert said. "Both of them. I've got a cabin up near Thunder Pass. Good water, clean air. Might not cure her, but at least she'll have her mountains." The doctor stood up, pacing behind his desk. "She'd need medicine. Regular doses of laudanum for the pain, clean bandages, proper bedding. Someone would need to know how to care for her when the coughing fits come." "Show me," Robert said simply. "I can learn." Dr. Wilson studied him for a long moment. "Why? You're not kin. You've known these girls less than an hour." Robert thought of Sarah, of promises made and broken, of redemption that comes in unexpected ways. "Maybe that's long enough." The doctor nodded slowly. "Wait here." He returned with a lamp and led Robert down the quiet hallway to Sasha's room. Rhea had already climbed onto the bed beside her sister, their heads close together as they whispered secrets in the gathering dark. Robert knelt beside the bed, the lamplight casting dancing shadows on the walls. Sasha turned to face him, her eyes bright with fever, but clear with purpose. "Did you mean it?" she asked, "about taking us to your cabin?" "I did," Robert said. He reached out and took her thin hand in his weathered one. "I promise you, Sasha. I'll take you to see those mountains, both of you." The smile that spread across her face was like sunrise breaking over the peaks. The first real smile anyone had seen from her in weeks. Rhea threw her arms around Robert's neck, nearly knocking him off balance. "When can we leave?" Sasha asked, trying to sit up straighter. "Hold on now," Dr. Wilson interrupted. "We need to make proper preparations. Robert, you'll need a suitable wagon, medical supplies." "I'll sort it," Robert said, gently disentangling himself from Rhea's embrace. "First light tomorrow, I'll start getting things ready." He stood up, adjusting his hat. "You two get some rest now, got some planning to do?" The girls' excited whispers followed him down the hallway as Dr. Wilson walked him out. At the door, the doctor handed him a folded paper. "List of supplies you'll need," he said. "Come see me tomorrow and I'll show you how to administer the medicines." "And Robert?" He gripped the mountain man's arm. "Thank you." Robert nodded and stepped out into the night. His feet carried him to the livery stable where he'd left his horse. The familiar smell of hay and leather surrounded him as he sank down onto a bale of straw. What had he just promised? He was a solitary man, had been since Sarah died. His cabin barely had room for him, let alone 2 young girls, one of them sick and dying. The trail up to Thunder Pass was treacherous even for experienced riders. And yet he pulled out the doctor's list, holding it up to the stable lantern's dim light. Medicines with names he couldn't pronounce. Bandages, blankets, special pillows to help with breathing. Food that would be gentle on a sick child's stomach. It seemed impossible. But then he remembered Sasha's smile, Rhea's fierce protective love for her sister, and the way Sarah used to say that nothing was impossible if your heart was in the right place. The night deepened around him as he sat there weighing the impossible. The soft nickering of horses and the distant cry of a night bird kept him company as he worked through the problems one by one in his mind. As the first hint of dawn began to lighten the sky, Robert stood up, his decision made. He'd need a different kind of wagon, something steady and smooth riding. His trading cart was too rough for a sick child. He was waiting outside Tompkins's mercantile when the owner arrived to open up. An hour and most of his fur trading money later, Robert was the owner of a sturdy mule cart with good springs. The bed was wide enough to make comfortable for Sasha, and the canvas top would protect her from sun and rain. "Going to need some modifications," he muttered to himself, running his hand along the wooden side rails. He could add padding to the seat, rig up a special support for her back, maybe even figure out a way to secure her wheelchair for when they made camp. The sun was barely over the horizon, but already his mind was racing with plans. He'd need to reinforce the wheels for the mountain trails, stock up on supplies, learn everything the doctor could teach him about caring for Sasha. Looking up at the mountains rising blue and mighty against the morning sky, Robert felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Purpose. Those peaks had been his escape for so long, a place to hide from the world's pain. Now they would be something different, a dying girl's dream, a sister's hope, and maybe, just maybe, his own path to redemption. He turned the mule cart toward the hospital, already making a mental list of the work ahead. There would be time later to worry about all the things that could go wrong. Right now, he had a promise to keep and 2 young lives depending on him to keep it. As he approached the hospital, he could see 2 small figures at the window, one standing, one seated, watching for him. Rhea waved excitedly while Sasha pressed her hand against the glass, her face glowing with anticipation. Robert touched the brim of his hat in greeting, a small smile tugging at his lips. The impossible journey ahead didn't seem quite so daunting when he saw the hope in their eyes. He had a lot of work to do before they could start, but for the first time in years he was looking forward to tomorrow. The pale light of dawn crept over the eastern horizon as Robert methodically loaded supplies into the modified mule cart. He'd spent most of the night making adjustments, padding the seat with soft blankets, creating a sturdy backrest, and ensuring every bump would be cushioned as much as possible. Now he carefully checked his provisions one last time. Cornmeal, he muttered, touching each item. Beans. Coffee. The burlap sacks rustled as he shifted them into place. Salt pork. Sugar. He'd traded the last of his furs for these supplies, but the weight in his chest felt lighter than it had in years. Fresh blankets lay folded nearby, the best he could afford. They weren't fancy, but they were clean and warm. Dr. Wilson had shown him how to layer them to keep Sasha comfortable, explaining how the mountain air might affect her breathing. The medicine box sat carefully wedged between 2 wooden supports, each bottle wrapped in cloth to prevent breaking. Robert had practiced preparing the laudanum doses until his hands stopped shaking. The doctor's instructions echoed in his head. 3 drops, no more when the pain gets bad. Always with water. Never straight. As he worked, the town began to stir. Shutters creaked open and smoke rose from chimneys into the crisp morning air. Robert ignored the curious stares from early risers as he made his final preparations. The hospital door opened and Dr. Wilson emerged, pushing Sasha's wheelchair. Rhea skipped alongside them, clutching a small cloth satchel tied with string, her entire world packed into one tiny bundle. Morning? Robert nodded, moving to help with Sasha. The girl looked even smaller in the early light, but her eyes sparkled with excitement. The mountains look closer today, she whispered as Robert carefully lifted her from the wheelchair. Her body felt like a bird in his hands, all hollow bones and fluttering heartbeat. Steady now, he murmured, settling her into the cart's padded seat. Dr. Wilson helped arrange blankets around her thin shoulders, protecting her from the morning chill. Robert noticed how the doctor's hands lingered, checking her pulse one last time. "You remember everything I showed you?" Dr. Wilson asked, his voice gruff with concern. "Yes, sir," Robert replied, patting the medicine box. "Every detail." Rhea tugged at Robert's sleeve. "Can I sit up front with you?" He looked down at her eager face and nodded. "Reckon that'd be fine." He lifted her onto the driver's seat, her tiny satchel still clutched tight. A small crowd had begun to gather, drawn by the unusual sight. Robert recognized several town elders among them, their faces pinched with disapproval. Mrs. Henderson, who ran the general store, stepped forward. "This is madness," she declared, hands on her hips. "Taking that poor child into the wilderness? She needs proper care, not some wild adventure." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Robert's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, another voice spoke up. "Robert Mason, have you lost your senses entirely?" Reverend Thompson pushed through the gathering. "That girl won't survive a day on the trail. You'll have her death on your conscience." Robert's hands clenched on the reins. He opened his mouth to argue, but a clear voice cut through the morning air. "If I die in the mountains," Sasha called out, her words carrying across the sudden silence, "at least I'll be seeing God's world, not these gray walls." The crowd fell silent. Robert turned to look at her, wrapped in her blankets but sitting straight and proud. Her face was pale but determined, chin lifted in defiance of their doubts. "I've watched the mountains through my window for months," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "Every day they call to me. If God wants me home, I'd rather meet him under open skies than in that bed." Robert felt his chest swell with pride and awe. This frail child had more courage than the whole town combined. He caught Dr. Wilson wiping his eyes and pretending to adjust his spectacles. Rhea reached back to squeeze her sister's hand. "Sasha's brave," she announced to the crowd, "and Mr. Robert will take good care of us." The townspeople shifted uncomfortably, unable to meet Sasha's steady gaze. Mrs. Henderson opened her mouth, then closed it again. The Reverend stepped back, his arguments dying unspoken. Robert used the moment to check the mule's harness one final time. The animal stood patient and steady, chosen specifically for its gentle nature. Dr. Wilson approached with a final package. "Extra bandages," he said quietly. "And there's broth powder in there too. Easy on her stomach." He hesitated, then added, "God go with you, Robert." Robert nodded his thanks, tucking the package carefully away. He turned to the cart, checking that both girls were secure. Rhea sat straight and proud on the driver's seat, while Sasha remained bundled against the morning chill, her face turned toward the mountains. "Time to go," Robert said softly. He climbed up beside Rhea, gathering the reins in his weathered hands. The crowd parted slowly, still silent in the wake of Sasha's words. With a gentle flick of the reins, Robert guided the mule cart forward. The wheels turned slowly at first, then picked up a steady rhythm on the packed dirt road. Behind them, the hospital's gray walls began to recede, and ahead, the foothills rose like promises against the morning sky. Rhea waved to Dr. Wilson until he was out of sight. Then she turned forward, her small face serious. "Which mountain is yours, Mr. Robert?" "See that tall peak there?" He pointed to a distant summit. "Just below that, there's a valley with a cabin. That's where we're headed." Sasha leaned forward slightly, her eyes fixed on the mountains growing larger with each step. The morning sun caught her face, and Robert saw something there he hadn't noticed before. Peace. The mule's hooves beat a steady rhythm as they left the town behind. Robert felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders, but this time it didn't feel like a burden. He glanced at Rhea, sitting tall beside him, then back at Sasha, her face glowing with quiet joy. The mountain air grew clearer as they climbed, carrying the scent of pine and promise. Robert knew the challenges ahead, the steep trails, the cold nights, the constant worry over Sasha's health. But watching her face as she breathed in her first taste of mountain air, he knew they'd made the right choice. They continued their steady progress toward the foothills, the town shrinking behind them. The morning sun climbed higher, warming their backs and casting long shadows ahead of them on the trail. Robert kept the pace gentle, careful of every bump and dip in the road. Rhea began humming softly, an old hymn that seemed to float on the morning breeze. Sasha closed her eyes, smiling as she listened to her sister's song, and Robert, who had spent years avoiding the company of others, found himself grateful for the simple music and the quiet courage of his two young charges. The mountains rose before them, solid and eternal, offering whatever welcome or challenge lay ahead. But for now, in this moment, they were simply three travelers on the trail, moving forward together into the promise of a new day. The sun dipped behind the foothills, painting the sky in deep purples and oranges. Robert pulled the mule cart off the trail into a small clearing sheltered by towering pines. The day's travel had left them all weary, but they'd made decent progress away from town. "This here's a good spot for the night," Robert announced, helping Rhea down from the driver's seat. She stretched her small legs while he secured the mule to a nearby tree. The evening air grew crisp as Robert gathered dry wood for a fire. He kept glancing at Sasha, who hadn't complained once during the bumpy journey, though he'd seen her wince at the worst jolts. "Might not be fancy, but beans'll stick to your ribs," Robert said, pulling out his old cast-iron pot. He positioned 3 rocks around the small fire he'd built, creating a stable platform for cooking. Rhea watched him work with curious eyes. "Can I help, Mr. Robert?" "Reckon you can fetch me some water from that canteen yonder," he replied, nodding toward their supplies. As she scampered to help, he carefully lifted Sasha from the cart. "How you holding up, girl?" he asked softly, settling her on a quilted blanket near the growing fire. "I'm fine," Sasha answered, though her voice was tired. "The stars are coming out." Robert wrapped another quilt around her shoulders before returning to his cooking. The familiar routine of trail life felt different with the two girls present. Usually, he ate in silence, watching the flames dance alone. But tonight, Rhea's clear voice filled the air as she began to sing. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. The old hymn floated through the evening air, simple and pure. Rhea sat close to her sister, one small hand holding Sasha's as she sang. Robert stirred the beans, trying to ignore the tightness in his throat. Sasha's sudden coughing interrupted the song. Robert quickly poured water from the canteen into a tin cup, helping her drink. When the spell passed, she leaned back, exhausted, but smiling. "Look at all those stars," she whispered, her face turned upward. Robert followed her gaze to the vast expanse above. The sky had deepened to black velvet, pierced by countless points of light. Out here, away from town, the stars seemed close enough to touch. Sarah loved the stars, he found himself saying, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Both girls turned to look at him. "Who's Sarah?" Rhea asked, scooting closer to the fire. Robert was quiet for a long moment, stirring the beans. "My wife," he finally answered. "She took sick 5 years back. Never got to see these stars again." Sasha's eyes met his across the fire, full of understanding beyond her years. "Did she like the mountains too?" "She loved them," Robert said softly. "Used to say God painted his best pictures up here." The fire crackled, sending sparks dancing upward to join the stars. Robert hadn't spoken of Sarah in years, had locked away the memories like precious things too painful to touch. But somehow, here with these two girls, the words didn't hurt as much. "I reckon she sees better views now," he added, his voice rough. Then, surprising himself, he bowed his head and whispered, "Lord, thank you for these stars, and for showing them to those who need to see them most." It was a simple prayer, the first he'd spoken since Sarah's passing, but it felt right. When he looked up, Rhea was smiling at him, and Sasha's eyes shone with starlight and unshed tears. The beans were ready soon after. Robert served them in tin plates, making sure the girls ate their fill. The night grew colder, but the fire kept them warm as they listened to the wild symphony of cricket songs and distant coyote calls. Morning came early, bringing with it new challenges. The road grew rougher as they climbed higher into the foothills. Robert tried to guide the mule cart around the worst bumps, but the jolting was inevitable. "Hold on tight now," he warned as they approached a particularly rocky stretch. Rhea gripped the seat beside him, while Sasha pressed her lips together, determined not to complain. But after an hour of rough travel, Robert could see the toll it was taking on Sasha. Her face had grown pale, and each jolt made her flinch despite her best efforts to hide it. "Time for a rest," he announced, pulling the cart to a stop beneath a spreading oak tree. Without waiting for protest, he lifted Sasha from the cart, carrying her to a soft patch of grass. "I can manage," she insisted weakly, but Robert shook his head. "Ain't no shame in needing help sometimes," he said gruffly. "Rest a spell. Trail ain't going nowhere." While Sasha rested, Rhea explored the immediate area under Robert's watchful eye, collecting pretty pebbles and interesting leaves. The girls' laughter echoed off the hillsides, bright as sunlight. They made slower progress that day, stopping more frequently to let Sasha rest. Robert carried her during the worst stretches of trail, her slight weight reminding him of how fragile their journey really was. By the third evening, the weather turned. Gray clouds rolled in from the west, bringing with them a sharp drop in temperature. The first snowflakes began to fall as Robert searched for a suitable campsite. "There," he said, spotting a cluster of evergreens near a frozen creek. "We'll shelter there tonight." He worked quickly to set up camp, knowing they needed proper protection from the weather. The snow was falling faster now, big flakes that melted on contact, but would soon begin to stick. "Rhea, help me stretch this canvas," he called, pulling out an old tarp. Together they created a makeshift shelter, angling it to protect them from the wind and snow. Sasha watched from her blankets, her breath making small clouds in the cooling air. "It's beautiful," she said, holding out her hand to catch the snowflakes. Robert got a fire going despite the weather, positioning it where the smoke would flow away from their shelter. The frozen creek provided fresh water once he broke through the thin ice. "Won't be much snow," he assured them, reading the signs in the clouds, "but we'll stay warm enough." As darkness fell, the snow created a peaceful hush over their camp. The fire cast dancing shadows on their canvas shelter, and Rhea once again began to sing, her voice soft and sweet in the gathering night. Robert wrapped the girls in every spare blanket they had, making sure Sasha was protected from the cold. Despite the harsh conditions, her face showed more life than he'd seen in the hospital. The mountain air, even snow-laden, seemed to strengthen her spirit, if not her body. As the girls drifted off to sleep, Robert kept watch, tending the fire and listening to the soft sounds of falling snow. He found himself whispering another prayer, something he'd thought he'd forgotten how to do. "Lord," he murmured, watching the snowflakes dance in the firelight, "help me get these little ones through this journey. Give me strength to see it done right." The creek murmured beneath its icy covering, and the wind whispered through the pines. Robert added another log to the fire, settling in for his vigil. The snow continued to fall, blanketing their small camp in white, while 3 hearts beat in shared warmth beneath the canvas shelter. The morning sun cast long shadows across the trail as Robert guided the mule cart higher into the mountains. 5 days of careful travel had brought them deep into the wilderness, where the air grew thin and crisp. Rhea dozed against his shoulder while Sasha sat wrapped in blankets, her eyes taking in every detail of the changing landscape. "Almost there," Robert said, his voice gruff with emotion as they approached the final ridge. The trail narrowed, winding between weathered granite boulders. The mules' hooves crunched on loose gravel as they climbed. Sasha leaned forward in her blankets, color rising in her pale cheeks. "How much further?" "Just beyond this rise." Robert clicked his tongue, encouraging the mule. "Valley opens up right ahead." The cart creaked as they made the final ascent. Robert's heart quickened. He hadn't seen his home in months, not since he'd left to trade furs in the lowlands. As they crested the ridge, the vista spread before them like a painting. Rhea stirred and opened her eyes. Her delighted gasp echoed across the valley. "Oh, look at all the trees." Below them stretched an endless sea of dark green pines flowing down the mountainsides like a river. Morning mist still clung to the valley floor, but sunshine pierced through in golden shafts, making the dew sparkle. In the center of it all, nestled in a natural clearing, sat Robert's cabin. Its sturdy log walls and shake roof looked just as he'd left them, though no welcoming smoke rose from the stone chimney. "It's more beautiful than I dreamed," Sasha whispered, her thin fingers gripping Robert's arm. Her voice trembled with wonder. "The pictures in my mind didn't do it justice." Robert felt his throat tighten at her words. He'd seen this view 1,000 times, but watching the sisters drink it in made him see it anew. The majesty of the mountains, the pristine wilderness, the perfect peace of his hidden valley. "Welcome home," he said softly, surprising himself with the word home. But looking at the girls' shining faces, he knew it was right. The trail down to the cabin switched back and forth across the slope. Robert took it slow, careful of his precious cargo. As they descended, details emerged from the morning mist. The split-rail fence around his small vegetable plot, the lean-to shelter where he stored firewood, the crude but serviceable stable he'd built for winter storms. When they finally reached level ground, Robert helped Rhea down from the cart, then gently lifted Sasha. "Let me get things settled first," he said, carrying her to a sun-warmed boulder near the cabin door. "Won't take but a minute to air the place out." The cabin door creaked open on leather hinges. Inside, dust motes danced in the shaft of light that penetrated the gloom. Robert threw open the shutters, letting fresh mountain air sweep through the single room. Everything was just as he'd left it. The rough-hewn table and chairs, the iron cookstove, the shelf of basic supplies, and, most importantly, the well-worn rocker by the massive stone fireplace. While Rhea explored the cabin's interior with wide eyes, Robert led the mule to the stable. He removed the harness, rubbed the animal down, and made sure it had fresh hay and water. By the time he returned, Rhea had already claimed a corner as her own, arranging her small collection of treasures on a wooden crate. "Looks like you're settling in just fine," he said, managing a smile. Then he went to fetch Sasha. She felt lighter in his arms than when they'd started the journey, but her eyes were brighter than he'd ever seen them. Robert carried her inside and settled her carefully in the old rocker by the fireplace. Sarah's rocker, he thought with a pang, but somehow it felt right to see Sasha there. "Thank you," she whispered as he tucked a quilt around her legs. Robert just nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He busied himself with practical tasks, laying a fire in the hearth, filling the water bucket from the spring, sweeping away the worst of the dust. Rhea helped in her own way, arranging wildflowers she'd picked in a tin can on the table. The sun was setting when they heard hoofbeats approaching. Robert stepped onto the porch, one hand near his belt, but relaxed when he recognized the rider. "Evening, Robert," called Circuit Preacher Elijah, dismounting with the stiffness of a long ride. The older man's kind face was creased with concern. "Thought I might find you here." "Preacher?" Robert nodded in greeting. "Come far to deliver that news you're carrying?" Elijah smiled sadly, pulling an envelope from his saddlebag. "News travels fast, even in the high country. Felt you ought to hear it proper, from a friend." Robert took the envelope, noting the railroad company's elaborate letterhead. His weathered fingers broke the seal as dread settled in his stomach. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in dense legal writing. He read it slowly, his jaw tightening with each line. "What is it?" Sasha called from inside. "Is everything all right?" Robert folded the letter carefully, trying to master his expression before turning back to the cabin. But Sasha's keen eyes read his face instantly. "Bad news?" she asked softly. "Railroad's claiming the land," Robert said, his voice rough. "Says they need it for a tunnel through the mountain. Offering to buy me out, but ain't really asking. Government's already approved their route." "But they can't just take it," Rhea protested, abandoning her flowers to run to Robert's side. "It's your home." "Ain't that simple, child," Preacher Elijah said gently. "Railroad's got the law on their side. More's the pity." Robert sank into a chair, the letter crumpled in his fist. The cabin had been his sanctuary for 15 years, ever since he and Sarah had built it together. Now it was meant to be Sasha's sanctuary too, a place where she could spend her remaining days surrounded by beauty instead of hospital walls. "How long?" he asked the preacher. 30 days to respond," Elijah replied. "After that, they start legal proceedings." Robert nodded slowly, his mind already working through possibilities. He could fight it, but that meant lawyers and courts, things he'd always avoided. He could take their money and try to find another place, but time was the one thing Sasha didn't have. "We just got here," Rhea said in a small voice. "It's not fair." "No, it ain't fair at all," Robert agreed, reaching out to squeeze her shoulder. Preacher Elijah cleared his throat. "I'd best be getting back before dark. But Robert, the town's been talking. There might be ways to fight this, if you're willing to stand up to them proper-like." "Much obliged for bringing word," Robert said, walking the preacher to his horse. "I'll give it some thought." After Elijah rode away, Robert prepared a simple supper of beans and cornbread. The girls ate quietly, the weight of uncertainty hanging heavy in the cabin's atmosphere. He helped Sasha with her evening medicines, then settled Rhea in a nest of blankets near her sister. Long after the girls had fallen asleep, Robert sat before the dying fire, the railroad's letter spread on his knee. The flames cast flickering shadows on the cabin walls that had sheltered him through 15 winters, walls that had heard Sarah's last breaths, walls that were supposed to give Sasha peace in whatever time she had left. He stared into the glowing embers, seeing Sarah's face in his mind. What would she tell him to do? Fight for their home, probably. She'd always been the stronger one when it came to standing up for what was right. The fire popped and settled, sending up a shower of sparks. Outside, a night bird called mournfully from the dark forest. Robert sat motionless, wrestling with decisions that would change not only his life, but the lives of 2 innocent girls who had come to trust him. The railroad might have the law on their side, but Robert had something they couldn't understand, a promise to keep and a dying child's dream to protect. He looked over at Sasha's peaceful face in the fading firelight, remembering her words when she first saw the valley. "It's more beautiful than I dreamed." Robert fed another log to the fire and settled in for a long night of thinking. Whatever came next, he knew one thing for certain. He wouldn't let them take this refuge without a fight, not when it meant so much to so many. The flames danced and swayed, casting warm light on the sleeping girls, while Robert sat vigil, turning over possibilities in his mind as the night crept slowly toward dawn. Morning sunlight streamed through the cabin windows as Robert showed the girls around their new home. The single room felt spacious despite its modest size, with the massive stone fireplace anchoring one end and well-worn furnishings arranged with care. "This here's the main living space," Robert explained, gesturing to the wooden table and chairs near the cook stove. "Nothing fancy, but it serves its purpose." Rhea bounced from corner to corner, exploring every nook with infectious enthusiasm. She discovered a shelf filled with dried herbs and asked, "What are these for?" "Those would be Sarah's," Robert's voice caught for a moment. "My late wife's medicines. She knew every plant in these mountains and what they could cure." Sasha watched from her rocker, her keen eyes taking in every detail. "It feels like a real home," she said softly. "Not like the hospital at all." Robert nodded, grateful for her understanding. He opened a wooden chest near the fireplace, pulling out a worn broom. "Reckon we ought to clear out some of this dust first thing." "I can help." Rhea grabbed the broom, nearly as tall as she was, and began sweeping with determined if uneven strokes. "Careful now," Robert cautioned, steadying her grip. "Like this. Long, steady sweeps." He guided her hands, showing her how to gather the dust instead of just spreading it around. Sasha's quiet laughter filled the cabin as she watched her sister's earnest efforts. The sound made Robert pause. It was the first time he'd heard such joy from her. "Think I could go outside?" Sasha asked after a while. "The air here, it feels different. Better." Robert studied her face, noting more color in her cheeks than he'd seen in town. "Reckon that mountain air might do you some good. Let me fetch your chair." He'd brought her wheelchair from the hospital, though it had been a challenge getting it up the mountain in the cart. Now he was glad for it. With gentle care, he lifted Sasha and settled her in the chair, then wheeled her onto the wide plank porch. Sasha closed her eyes and breathed deeply. "Pine trees," she said with wonder. "And something else, sweeter?" "That'll be the wildflowers in the meadow," Robert explained. "Come summer, whole valley turns into a carpet of color." They sat in comfortable silence, watching Rhea chase butterflies in the yard, while the morning sun warmed their faces. Robert noticed how Sasha seemed to draw strength from the clean mountain air, sitting straighter in her chair than she had in the hospital. As midday approached, Robert's thoughts turned to supper. "How do you girls feel about fresh trout?" "Real fish?" Rhea asked, running back to the porch. "From where?" "Creek's just down the slope," Robert said, retrieving his fishing gear from the cabin. "Been feeding me for 15 years. He helped Sasha back inside, making sure she was comfortable before heading to the creek with Rhea trailing behind him like an eager shadow. The clear water tumbled over rocks, deep pools gathering in the bends where trout lurked. "Now fishing takes patience," Robert explained, showing Rhea how to bait the hook. "Got to be still and quiet-like, or you'll scare them away." To his surprise, Rhea proved to be a natural at staying still, watching the line with intense concentration. When Robert landed a fat trout, she clapped her hands in delight. "Can I touch it?" she asked. "Careful of the fins," he warned, holding the fish steady. "They can be sharp." They caught 3 more trout before heading back to the cabin. Robert showed Rhea how to clean the fish while Sasha watched from her chair, asking questions about the creek and the fish that lived there. As the sun began its descent, Robert built up the fire and set about cooking their catch. The smell of roasting trout filled the cabin, making both girls' eyes light up with anticipation. "Smells better than hospital food," Sasha said with a smile. Just as Robert was serving the fish onto tin plates, a shadow fell across the doorway. He tensed for a moment, then relaxed as he recognized the figure. "Evening, Henry," he called out. "Come share our supper?" Henry, a Ute scout Robert had known for years, stepped into the firelight. He was dressed in a mixture of native and settler clothing, his watchful eyes taking in the scene before him. "These are your new family?" Henry asked, gesturing to the girls with careful respect. Robert made introductions, noting how Henry's normally guarded expression softened when Rhea offered him a shy wave. "Much has changed since you were last here," Henry said, accepting a plate of fish with a nod of thanks. "Heard about the railroad. Robert replied, his voice growing serious. Figured you might come by with news? Henry ate slowly, choosing his words with care. They plan more than just a tunnel, he said finally. Their machines will split the mountain. When dynamite touches rock, it will poison the waters. Sasha leaned forward in her chair, her face troubled. Poison the creek? But what about the fish and the people who need the water? The Ute people have lived by these waters since before memory, Henry explained, his voice gentle but heavy with concern. Our children drink from the springs. Our horses graze in valleys watered by these streams. If the railroad comes. Then we mustn't let them take it, Sasha said softly but with firm conviction. Robert caught Henry's eye across the fire, seeing his own determination reflected there. This wasn't just about his cabin anymore. It was about the water that gave life to both settler and native families, about the land that had sheltered them all. No, child, Henry agreed, something like hope warming his voice. Perhaps we must not. They talked late into the evening, Henry sharing what he knew of the railroad's plans while Rhea dozed in her blanket nest. Sasha listened intently, asking questions that showed wisdom beyond her years. When Henry finally rose to leave, he paused at the door. The elders say change comes like winter wind, cannot stop it, but can prepare. He looked at Robert meaningfully. But some changes must be faced together. After Henry disappeared into the darkness, Robert sat thinking about the scout's words. The railroad seemed unstoppable, backed by money and government papers. But looking at Sasha's peaceful face as she slept in Sarah's old rocker, he knew Henry was right. Some things were worth fighting for, not alone but together. The valley had brought healing to his heart after Sarah's death. Now it was bringing life back to Sasha's eyes. And he wouldn't let anyone destroy that. Not for a tunnel, not for progress, not for all the gold in Denver. The fire crackled low as Robert added another log, its warm light touching the sleeping girls' faces. Outside, a lone coyote called into the night, its song echoing off the valley walls that had sheltered generations of both settlers and Ute. In that moment, Robert understood that saving this land meant more than just keeping his home. It meant preserving a way of life for all who depended on these pure waters. The mountain winter settled over the valley like a thick blanket, transforming Robert's homestead into a wonderland of white. Each morning, fresh snow decorated the pine boughs and smoothed the rugged landscape into gentle curves. Inside the snug cabin, life took on a rhythm as natural as breathing. Sasha's transformation surprised them all. The mountain air, crisp and clean, seemed to work magic on her frail body. Her coughs grew less frequent, and color bloomed in her cheeks like spring flowers pushing through snow. Robert often paused in his work to watch her wheel herself around the cabin, her determination growing stronger with each passing day. "Look at me," Sasha called out one morning, her wheels leaving twin tracks in the packed dirt floor as she maneuvered between the table and the hearth. "I can do it all by myself now." Rhea, never far from her sister's side, clapped and danced around the wheelchair. "You're getting so fast." She darted in front of Sasha, who skillfully turned to avoid collision, both girls dissolving into giggles. Robert smiled from where he stood by the woodpile, his arms full of split logs. "Careful now," he cautioned, but his voice held more pride than worry. The sound of their laughter warmed the cabin better than any fire. Outside, the work never ceased. Robert spent hours splitting wood, showing Rhea how to stack the smaller pieces near the door. "Gotta keep ahead of the cold," he explained, demonstrating how to check for the driest logs. "Like this?" Rhea asked, struggling with an armload of kindling. "That's right," Robert nodded. "You're becoming quite the helper." He taught her other tasks too, how to measure out oats for the mule, how to check its hooves for packed snow, how to brush its coat until it shone. The old mule, usually suspicious of strangers, took to Rhea like they'd known each other for years. "He likes me," Rhea exclaimed as the mule gently lipped an apple from her small palm. "Reckon he does," Robert agreed. "Animals know good hearts when they meet them." Evenings became precious times of warmth and stories. After supper, while the lamplight cast dancing shadows on the log walls, they would gather near the hearth. Robert would stir the stew pot hanging over the fire, adding whatever herbs he'd managed to find under the snow. The aroma of sage and wild onions filled the cabin, mixing with the sweet smell of pine smoke. Sasha proved to be a natural storyteller. Her voice would rise and fall like music as she shared memories of her parents, her father's laugh, her mother's garden, the way they would dance in the kitchen on Sunday afternoons. "Tell about the time Papa tried to catch the raccoon in the corn patch," Rhea would beg, even though she'd heard it dozens of times. Sasha's eyes would sparkle as she began. "It was the middle of summer, and that raccoon had been stealing our corn for weeks." Robert found himself leaning forward during these tales, drawn in by the way Sasha painted pictures with her words. Yet beneath these peaceful moments, worry gnawed at his heart like a hungry winter wolf. The railroad's threat hung over them like a storm cloud, growing darker with each passing day. One night, after the girls had fallen asleep, Rhea curled up in her trundle bed, Sasha in Sarah's old rocker. Robert sat at the rough-hewn table, studying the railroad's notice by lamplight. The official seal seemed to mock him, its authority, threatening everything they'd built here. The next morning, as he served up bowls of steaming porridge, he made his announcement. "Been thinking," he said, watching the girls' faces. "Reckon it's time I went to see the judge in the county seat. Maybe he'll listen to reason about this railroad business." Sasha set down her spoon, her expression serious. "I want to go with you." Robert shook his head. "Journey's too hard, especially in this weather. Better you stay here where it's warm." "My voice matters," Sasha said firmly, placing her small hand over his weathered one. "The judge needs to see who he's hurting with his decision. Not just you, not just the Ute people, but all of us who love this valley." Robert started to protest, but the certainty in Sasha's eyes stopped him. He remembered how she had faced down the town elders, how her quiet courage had silenced their criticism. Perhaps she was right. Perhaps her presence would speak louder than any legal argument he could make. "It'll be dangerous," he warned. "Roads are treacherous this time of year." "I'm not afraid," Sasha replied, "and Rhea can help take care of me." Rhea straightened up, proud to be included. "I can help pack and make sure Sasha stays warm." Robert looked between their determined faces and felt his resistance crumble. "All right," he sighed. "We'll leave at first light tomorrow. But we'll need to prepare careful-like." The rest of the day was spent in preparation. Robert checked and double-checked the mule cart, adding extra blankets and straw for insulation. He packed provisions, jerky, hard biscuits, dried apples, enough for several days' journey. "Drömmarna bäst sen denna färg. Rhea krimi krunder tider." Rhea helped gather Sasha's medicines and extra quilts, while Sasha herself wrote out her thoughts in a small notebook, preparing what she would say to the judge. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Robert noticed a new strength in Sasha's bearing. She sat straighter in her wheelchair, her chin lifted with purpose. The frail girl from the hospital seemed like a distant memory. "You know what made me start getting better?" Sasha asked suddenly, her voice soft in the fire-lit quiet. Robert looked up from where he was oiling the cart's wheels. "What's that?" "Hope," she said simply. "In the hospital, I had nothing to hope for except the next dose of medicine. But here," she gestured to the window, where moonlight sparkled on fresh snow. "Here I have mountains to look at, clean air to breathe, and something worth fighting for." Robert felt his throat tighten. He thought of Sarah, how she had loved this valley too, how she would have adored these girls who had brought life back to his lonely cabin. "Get some rest now," he managed. "Tomorrow comes early." As he banked the fire for the night, Robert watched Rhea tucking extra blankets around her sister, their whispered conversation punctuated by quiet giggles. The scene stirred something deep in his heart, a fierce protectiveness but also a growing certainty. They would face the judge together, their small family united in purpose. And somehow, some way, they would find the words to make him understand what this valley meant to them all. In the dark hours before dawn, Robert rose quietly to check the weather. The sky had cleared, stars sharp as ice crystals above the snow-covered peaks. A good sign, he hoped, for the journey ahead. He began preparing the cart while the girls still slept, not wanting to wake them until necessary. The mule stomped impatiently in the stable, its breath steaming in the pre-dawn chill. Robert worked methodically, checking every strap and bolt, leaving nothing to chance. As the first gray light touched the eastern sky, he heard movement inside the cabin. Sasha was awake, already dressed and ready, her face set with determination. Rhea helped her with her coat and boots, then wrapped her in layers of quilts. "Dawn's coming," Robert said softly from the doorway. "Time to go." The girls nodded, ready for whatever lay ahead. Together, they would make their stand before the judge, fighting not just for a piece of land, but for the heart of the mountains themselves. The winter dawn broke harsh and bitter over the mountain trails. Robert had risen before first light, checking the mule cart one final time before helping the girls aboard. He tucked thick quilts around them, layer upon layer until only their faces peeked out. "Like little bear cubs in their den," he said, trying to lighten the mood. Rhea giggled, but Sasha's eyes remained serious, fixed on the path ahead. The mules' hooves crunched through frozen snow as they set out. Robert walked alongside, one hand on the reins, the other ready to steady the cart over rough patches. His breath came out in white puffs, and frost gathered in his beard. The cold bit deep, but he hardly noticed it. His mind was too full of worry about what lay ahead at the courthouse. "Robert?" Sasha's voice came soft through the morning stillness. "Do you think the judge will listen?" He patted her bundled form. "Reckon he'll have to listen. Law says every citizen gets their say." The sun climbed higher, but brought little warmth. Wind whistled through the pines, finding every gap in their clothing. Robert stopped often to check on the girls, adjusting blankets and offering sips of hot coffee from his tin flask. "You doing all right?" he asked during one such stop, noting how Sasha's lips had taken on a bluish tinge. She nodded bravely. "Just cold. But I won't complain, this matters too much." Rhea huddled closer to her sister, sharing what warmth she could. "Tell us a story, Robert?" "It helps pass the time." So Robert told them tales as they traveled, about the mountains in springtime, about the flowers that would carpet the valley, about the birds that would return to nest. He spoke of better days ahead, though his own heart was heavy with doubt. By midday, the courthouse town came into view. Its buildings hunched against the winter sky. People stopped to stare as Robert guided the cart down the main street. Some whispered behind their hands, while others openly pointed at Sasha in her wheelchair. "Ain't natural," one man muttered, "dragging sick children through this weather." Robert's jaw tightened, but Sasha touched his arm. "Let them talk," she whispered. "We know why we're here." The courthouse loomed before them, its brick walls dark with age. Robert helped Sasha into her wheelchair, making sure she was warmly wrapped. Rhea stayed close, carrying her sister's notebook. Inside, the courtroom was already filling with townsfolk. News traveled fast in small communities, and many had come to watch the proceedings. The railroad agent, Caldwell, stood near the judge's bench, his suit pressed and his manner confident. Robert wheeled Sasha to the front, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. The judge, a gray-haired man with sharp eyes, looked up from his papers. "Who comes before this court?" he asked, his voice carrying through the quiet room. Robert stepped forward. "Robert Wheeler, Your Honor. I've come about the railroad's claim on my land." He laid out his case as best he could, speaking of water rights and grazing lands, of promises made to the Ute people, of the valley's delicate balance. His words were plain but honest, born from years of living close to the land. "The tunnel they want to build," he explained, "it'll poison the creek that feeds the whole valley. Not just my place, but the Ute camps downstream, too. And now," he gestured to Sasha and Rhea, "now I've got these little ones to think about." The judge listened impassively, occasionally glancing at Caldwell, who stood with a slight smile playing about his lips. When Robert finished, Caldwell stepped forward with a sheaf of papers. "The railroad's claim is legally sound," he said smoothly. "Progress cannot be held back by one man's sentimentality. We have surveys, geological reports. Please, Your Honor." Sasha's clear voice cut through Caldwell's words. "May I speak?" The judge peered down at her over his spectacles, something softening in his stern face. "You may." Sasha wheeled herself forward slightly, her face pale but determined. 3 months ago, I was dying in a hospital bed. The doctor said I wouldn't see Christmas. But then Robert took me to the mountains, and something changed. The room grew very still. Even Caldwell's smile faded as Sasha continued. Up there I can breathe. The air is clean and sweet. I've watched eagles soar over the valley and seen stars so bright they make you cry. It's become my home. My mountain home. Her voice caught slightly. The railroad wants to tear through that valley like it's nothing. But it's everything to us. To the Ute people who've lived there for generations. To Robert, who tends it like a garden. To my sister, who's finally found a place to belong. Tears glistened in her eyes, but her voice remained steady. I know I'm just a girl, and maybe I won't see many more seasons. But that valley deserves to live, even if I don't. Please, Your Honor, don't let them destroy it. The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. The judge removed his spectacles, polishing them slowly with a handkerchief. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. The law provides for temporary stays in cases where environmental impact requires further study. He looked directly at Caldwell. I'm granting such a stay until spring hearings can be held. No construction will begin until then. A murmur ran through the crowd. Caldwell's face darkened, but he could do nothing but bow stiffly to the judge's ruling. Robert felt his knees go weak with relief. As people began filing out of the courtroom, many stopped to look at Sasha with new eyes. The whispers now held respect instead of criticism. Sasha barely noticed. She had slumped in her wheelchair, exhausted but smiling. We did it, she whispered to Robert. We really did it. You did it, he corrected gently, squeezing her shoulder. Your words touched his heart. Rhea hugged her sister carefully. Does this mean we can stay in the mountains? For now at least, Robert said. Come on, let's find you both a warm bed for the night. It's too cold to travel back today. He knew a widow who ran a boarding house not far from the courthouse. Mrs. Peterson took one look at Sasha's tired face and led them straight to her best room, fussing over the girls like a mother hen. I'll bring up some hot soup, she said, stoking the fire high. Poor lambs must be half frozen. The room was simple but clean, with a big bed piled high with quilts. Robert helped Sasha settle in while Rhea explored every corner with curiosity. When Mrs. Peterson returned with the soup, Sasha surprised everyone by eating an entire bowl. Color had returned to her cheeks, and her eyes shone with quiet joy. Robert, she said as she finished the last spoonful, I think I might see another spring. The words caught him off guard, making his throat tight with emotion. He tucked the blankets around her as she drifted toward sleep, her face peaceful in the firelight. Rhea curled up beside her sister, already half asleep herself. Robert settled into the room's single chair, prepared to keep watch through the night. Outside, snow began falling again, but inside, hope burned warm and steady as the hearth fire. The journey home felt lighter than the outward trek. Though winter's grip hadn't loosened, the sun seemed brighter on the snow-draped peaks. Robert's mule picked its way carefully along the familiar trail, while inside the cart, Sasha and Rhea's voices rose in song. My home's in Montana where the mountains touch sky, Sasha sang, her clear voice carrying on the crisp air. Rhea hummed along, not quite knowing all the words, but eager to join in. Robert found himself whistling the tune, surprising himself. He hadn't made music since his wife passed. You've got a fine voice there, Robert, Sasha called from beneath her blankets. You should sing with us more often. He ducked his head, embarrassed but pleased. Reckon I'm a mite rusty? Then we'll just have to practice, Rhea declared, making both Robert and Sasha chuckle. When they finally reached the cabin, smoke still curled from the chimney. Henry had kept the fire going as promised. The sight of it against the white mountains made Robert's heart swell. This was home, truly home, for the first time in years. The days that followed settled into a comfortable rhythm. Robert rose before dawn to split wood, the sharp crack of his axe echoing across the valley. He showed Rhea how to check the mule's hooves for ice and stones, her small hands growing confident with practice. The little girl proved eager to learn everything about mountain life. Like this, she'd ask, carefully threading a needle to mend a torn blanket, or working to tie the proper knot in leather straps. Just like that, Robert would answer, pride warming his voice. You're a natural little one. Sasha spent her days by the big window, sketching the mountains in a notebook Mrs. Peterson had given her. Her drawings captured the majesty of the peaks, though she insisted they never quite matched the real thing. On warmer days, Robert would wheel her onto the porch wrapped in quilts where she could breathe the pine-scented air and watch eagles circle overhead. Even Robert found himself smiling more, something he'd nearly forgotten how to do. The cabin rang with Ria's laughter and Sasha's stories. In the evenings, they'd gather by the fire, sharing simple meals and simpler dreams. "Tell us about springtime again," Ria would beg, and Robert would describe the wildflowers that would carpet the meadow, the return of the bluebirds, the way the whole valley would come alive with color and sound. But winter wasn't done with them yet. One morning, Robert woke to an ominous silence. The air felt heavy, pregnant with storm. Dark clouds rolled in from the northwest, bringing wind that moaned through the pines like a hungry wolf. "Better get extra wood inside," he told Ria, who helped him stack logs by the hearth. "Looks like we're in for a big one." The storm hit just before nightfall. Snow drove sideways past the windows, and the wind found every crack in the cabin's walls. For 3 days, they were trapped inside while the blizzard raged. Robert kept the fire burning hot, and they passed the time with stories and songs. Ria taught them a clapping game she'd learned in town, and Sasha shared tales she'd read in borrowed books. But on the third night, as the storm began to weaken, Sasha started coughing. It wasn't her usual gentle cough. This came from deep in her chest, wet and rough. Robert was stoking the fire when he heard Ria cry out in alarm. "Robert, something's wrong." He turned to see blood on Sasha's handkerchief, bright red against the white cloth. Fear seized his heart as he rushed to her side, gathering her slight frame in his arms. She felt so fragile, like a bird with broken wings. "I'm sorry," Sasha whispered between coughs. "I didn't want to frighten anyone." "Hush now," Robert said, his voice rough with emotion. "Just breathe slow and steady." But in his mind, he heard the doctor's words from that first day. 3 months at most. They'd already had 2. Ria hovered nearby, her face pale with worry. "Should I make tea? The kind with honey that helps her throat?" Robert nodded, grateful for something practical to do. While Ria busied herself at the stove, he held Sasha, supporting her through each coughing spell. The hours crept by like years until finally, near dawn, she fell into an exhausted sleep. The next few days were tense as Sasha slowly regained some strength. The color returned to her cheeks, and her cough eased back to its usual gentle flutter. But Robert saw how the episode had drained her. She tired more easily now, and sometimes he caught her staring at the mountains with a longing that broke his heart. Then Henry arrived with news that made everything worse. The Ute scout's face was grim as he shared what he'd heard in town. "Railroad men been spreading money around," he said, warming his hands by the fire. "Judge's clerk, county assessor, even some town council members. They're buying votes for the spring hearing." Robert's hands clenched into fists. "Bribes? That's not legal." "Legal don't matter much to men like that," Henry replied. "They want the tunnel. They'll do whatever it takes." Sasha listened from her chair, her face troubled. But the judge seemed fair. Surely he won't be swayed by bribes? Henry shrugged. "Judge seems honest enough, but if everyone around him is bought..." He left the sentence unfinished. After Henry left, a heavy silence fell over the cabin. The peace they'd found felt suddenly fragile, like spring ice over a deep river. Robert watched Sasha gazing out at her beloved mountains and felt helplessness rise in his throat. How could he protect her from both the railroad's greed and her own failing body? That night, after the girls were asleep, Robert sat long by the dying fire. The storm's fury had passed, leaving the world outside crystal clear and star-filled. Through the window, he could see the same peaks that had first captured Sasha's heart, now silvered by moonlight. They seemed eternal, unchanging, yet he knew better. Nothing lasted forever. Not mountains, not health, not happiness. He added another log to the fire, listening to its slow crackle. From the bedroom came the sound of Sasha's breathing, still raspy but steady. Ria murmured something in her sleep. These 2 girls had brought life back to his cabin, hope back to his heart. He couldn't lose them, not to illness, not to the railroad, not to anything. But hope, he was learning, was as delicate as the first spring flowers pushing through snow. It needed protection, nurturing, and sometimes fierce defense. The railroad might have money and power on its side, But Robert had something stronger, love for this land and these children who'd become his family. He stood at the window watching the stars wheel slowly overhead. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, his girls were safe and warm. Sometimes, he reflected, that had to be enough. In the shadows, Sasha coughed softly in her sleep. Robert moved quietly to check on her, adjusting her blankets with gentle hands. Her face was peaceful, showing no trace of the earlier crisis. Beside her, Rhea stirred but didn't wake, one small hand clasped in her sister's. Robert returned to his chair by the fire, determined to keep watch through the night. Outside, an owl called, its voice carrying clear and lonely through the winter air. But inside the cabin, despite the threats gathering like storm clouds on the horizon, love held strong against the darkness. The letter arrived on a bitter February morning. Robert recognized the official seal before he even broke the wax, the railroad company's mark, stamped in blood red. His weathered hands trembled slightly as he unfolded the paper, though whether from cold or dread he couldn't say. Inside, the formal language couldn't disguise the cruel simplicity of the message. The valley would be seized within 30 days. The railroad's surveyors would arrive first, followed by work crews with dynamite and steel. Robert's home, his refuge, would be destroyed for a tunnel that would split the mountain's heart. He read the letter 3 times, each word cutting deeper than the last. The paper crackled in his tightening grip. Suddenly, with a roar that startled the chickens outside, he slammed his fist down on the wooden table. The solid pine, which had weathered 20 years of mountain winters, cracked straight down the middle. "Robert?" Sasha's voice came weak from her chair by the window. She'd been having more bad days lately, her face growing paler as winter dragged on. Now she watched him with concern in her tired eyes. "What is it?" He wanted to shield her from this news, but she deserved the truth. "Railroad's coming," he said roughly. 30 days. Rhea, who had been playing with her rag doll in the corner, looked up sharply. "But they can't," she cried. "This is our home now." "Ain't nothing they can't take if they've got the paper to back it," Robert said bitterly. He slumped into a chair, the fight draining out of him. Everything they'd built here, the peace, the belonging, the family they'd pieced together would be scattered like leaves in a storm. Tears began rolling down Rhea's cheeks. She ran to Sasha, burying her face in her sister's lap. Sasha stroked her hair gently, though her own face had grown even paler. "You mustn't lose hope," Sasha whispered. Her voice was faint but determined. "God didn't bring us all this way just to abandon us now." Robert couldn't meet her eyes. Hope felt like a luxury he couldn't afford anymore. He grabbed his coat from its peg by the door. "I'm riding to town," he announced. "Maybe the preacher will have some counsel." The ride into town was long and cold. Snow had fallen fresh the night before, and his horse picked its way carefully through the drifts. Robert barely noticed the bitter wind. His mind churned with possibilities, each more desperate than the last. He found Preacher Elijah in his small church office, warming his hands over a meager fire. The old man's face fell as he read the railroad's letter. "I feared this might come," the preacher said heavily. "They've been buying up land all through the territory. Even the church council's powerless against them. Half our donors have railroad investments." "There must be something we can do," Robert insisted. "Some law, some appeal." The preacher shook his head sadly. "The law's on their side, Robert. They've got the governor's backing and more lawyers than we've got cattle in the county." He laid a gentle hand on Robert's shoulder. "Sometimes the Lord's path takes us places we don't want to go." "Don't talk to me about the Lord's path," Robert growled, shrugging off the touch. "Where was he when my wife died? Where is he now, when those girls need a home?" He stormed out, leaving the preacher's prayers unanswered behind him. The ride home seemed twice as long, darkness falling early as heavy clouds rolled in from the west. By the time he reached the cabin, night had settled fully over the valley. Robert took care of his horse mechanically, then gathered wood for the fire. But instead of going inside where lamplight glowed warm through the windows, he sank down on the porch steps. His rifle lay across his knees. Not loaded, just familiar weight in his hands. Above, stars pierced the clouds here and there, cold and distant as God himself. He didn't know how long he sat there, letting the cold seep into his bones. Time seemed to stop, like the frozen creek below the cabin. His thoughts circled endlessly. The railroad's letter, Sasha's failing health, Ria's tears, his own helplessness. The creak of the cabin door barely registered, but small boots crunching in the snow did. Ria appeared beside him, wrapped in a quilt. Without a word, she climbed into his lap, her small body warm against his chest. "You're freezing," she scolded, trying to wrap the quilt around them both. "You should be in bed, little one." "So should you." She snuggled closer. "Sasha's worried about you. She says you look like you did when we first met you, all dark inside." Robert's throat tightened. "Maybe I am dark inside. World's a dark place sometimes." "But you promised," Ria said simply. "You promised Sasha the mountains. You can't break a promise just because it gets hard." The words hit him like a physical blow. He had promised not just to show Sasha the mountains, but to protect her, to give her a home for whatever time she had left. What kind of man would he be to give up now? "Wait here," he said gruffly, setting Ria aside. He went into the cabin, straight to the trunk where he kept his few precious possessions. At the bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, lay his wife's Bible. He hadn't opened it since her death, but his hands remembered its weight, the smooth leather of its cover. Back outside, he settled Ria in his lap again and opened the Bible. The pages fell naturally to a worn spot, the Psalms his wife had loved best. By starlight and memory, he began to pray, his voice rough with disuse. "Lord," he whispered, "I ain't been much for talking to you lately. Maybe I've been too angry, too proud. But these girls need your help now. I need your help. Show me a way through this valley of shadows." Ria's small hand covered his where it rested on the Bible. "Amen," she added solemnly. Inside the cabin, they could hear Sasha coughing. The sound jerked Robert back to the present moment, to cold feet and responsibilities waiting. He stood, sweeping Ria up in his arms. "Time for bed, little one. Tomorrow's soon enough for planning. Are you still dark inside?" she asked as he carried her to the door. Robert paused, considering. The helpless rage had eased somewhat, replaced by something quieter but stronger. Not quite hope, perhaps, but determination. A promise was a promise after all. "No," he said finally, "not so dark anymore." Inside, the fire had burned low. Robert added wood carefully, watching the flames catch and grow. Sasha was asleep in her chair by the window, her face peaceful despite the worry lines that had appeared lately. He tucked the quilt more securely around her shoulders, then settled into his own chair with the Bible still in his hands. Outside, snow began falling again, soft and steady. Robert watched it through the window, remembering other nights he'd sat vigil like this. After his wife died, during the war, when the mountain lions came too close to the cabin, he'd survived those dark times. With God's help, and he could admit now that he needed it, they would survive this too. He opened the Bible again, letting its familiar words wash over him. His wife had always said that strength came not from fighting alone, but from knowing when to ask for help. Perhaps it was time to put pride aside and remember that lesson. As if in answer to his thoughts, the wind shifted, carrying with it the distant howl of a wolf. Not a lone cry, but the song of a pack, many voices joining together, strong against the night. Robert smiled slightly, hearing the message in that wild chorus. Tomorrow he would start gathering allies. The railroad might have money and power, but he had something they couldn't buy. People who called this valley home. The Bible's pages rustled as he turned to them, searching for the passages his wife had marked. Outside, the snow continued falling, covering the valley in clean white possibility. Dawn would bring its own challenges, but for now, in the quiet hours before morning, Robert let himself rest in the peace of renewed purpose and remembered faith. Ria's words echoed in his mind. "You promised." Simple words, but they had rekindled something he'd thought lost. Sometimes, he reflected, the Lord worked through the smallest messengers to deliver the largest truths. The fire crackled softly, sending shadows dancing across the cabin walls. Robert settled deeper into his chair, the Bible open on his lap, and prepared to keep watch through the remaining hours of darkness. Whatever tomorrow might bring, he would face it with restored resolve and the knowledge that he didn't stand alone. The morning sun cast long shadows across the muddy street, as Robert guided his wagon into town. Sasha sat bundled in blankets beside him, her face pale but determined. Little Rhea huddled close to her sister, eyes wide at the bustling activity around them. The town seemed different today, tenser with clusters of people gathering on wooden sidewalks, speaking in hushed tones. Word had spread that the railroad men were in town, holding court at the saloon like kings on their throne. Robert pulled the wagon to a stop near the hitching post. His hands trembled slightly as he tied off the reins, but his voice remained steady. "You sure about this, Sasha?" Could get ugly in there. Sasha nodded, her thin fingers gripping the armrests of her wheelchair. "I'm sure. This is our home now, too." With gentle care, Robert lifted Sasha into her wheelchair while Rhea hovered nearby. A small crowd had begun to gather, watching silently as Robert straightened his worn coat and checked his rifle was secure in its scabbard. "Whatever happens," he told the girls quietly, "remember you've got more courage than any of those men in there." The saloon doors creaked as Robert pushed them open. The usual afternoon card players and drinkers fell silent, turning to stare. At a corner table sat three well-dressed men, the railroad agents, their fancy suits and gold watch chains marking them as clearly as brands on cattle. Agent Caldwell, their leader, barely glanced up from his whiskey. "Well, if it isn't the mountain man himself. Come to see reason about that valley of yours?" Robert stepped forward, Sasha's wheelchair creaking softly behind him. The floorboards groaned under their weight as conversations died away. Even the bartender stopped polishing glasses to watch. "I've come to make you an offer," Robert said, his voice carrying in the silence. Caldwell smirked. "Unless it's your signature on our contract, I'm not interested." Robert drew himself up to his full height. With deliberate movements, he unstrapped his rifle and laid it on the table. "My father's rifle. Never missed a shot." Next came his knife, gleaming in the dusty light. "My traps, my pelts, my horse. Everything I own. It's yours. In exchange for leaving my valley be." A ripple of whispers swept through the saloon. Caldwell's smirk widened as he shared amused glances with his companions. "You think a few trinkets can stop progress? That valley's worth thousands to the railroad. Your junk wouldn't cover a day's expenses." "It's all I have," Robert said simply. "Every possession I've earned in 20 years of honest work." Laughter erupted from the railroad men's table. "Honest work?" one agent sneered. "Hiding in the hills like a savage?" Robert's hands clenched, but before he could respond, a small voice cut through the mockery. "Please, sirs." The laughter died as Sasha wheeled herself forward. Her face was white as paper, but her eyes blazed with quiet intensity. Rhea clutched her sister's hand, trembling but standing tall. "I know you don't care about Robert's things," Sasha continued softly, "or about our home. But please, just give me spring. That's all I'm asking for. One more spring in the mountains." The saloon fell absolutely silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath outside the dusty windows. Caldwell's smirk faltered as he met Sasha's steady gaze. A chair scraped against the floor as Preacher Elijah stood from his seat by the wall. "The girl speaks truth," he said, moving to stand beside Robert. "This isn't about progress. It's about greed, pure and simple." "Now see here," Caldwell began, but another voice cut him off. "The preacher's right." Judge Matthews rose from his own table, his judicial authority lending weight to his words. "You men come here with your fancy papers and big promises, but what about the people who already call this land home?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. More men stood, ranchers, shopkeepers, miners, moving to form a wall of solidarity behind Robert and the girls. "You can't stop the railroad," Caldwell blustered, but his voice had lost its edge of certainty. "Maybe not," the judge replied, "but we can make sure it goes around that valley instead of through it. Might cost you a bit more in construction, but I reckon that's cheaper than having every honest man in the county turn against your company." Caldwell's face reddened as he looked around the room. Where moments before he'd seen only backward locals to be dismissed, now he faced a united community. His eyes fell again on Sasha, whose quiet dignity seemed to rebuke him more than any angry words could have done. The agent cleared his throat, tugging at his silk cravat. Perhaps we could review the proposed route. For humanitarian considerations, of course." "Of course," the judge agreed dryly. I'm sure your superiors would appreciate avoiding any unfortunate publicity about forcing dying children from their homes." Caldwell stood abruptly, gathering his papers. "We'll withdraw our claim on the valley. For now." He gestured sharply to his companions. "Good day, gentlemen." The railroad men hurried out, their polished boots clicking rapidly across the wooden floor. As the saloon doors swung shut behind them, a cheer erupted from the crowd. Men clapped Robert on the back while women wiped tears from their eyes. Sasha slumped in her wheelchair, the strength that had carried her through the confrontation finally giving way. Robert knelt beside her, his own eyes glistening. "You did it, little one. You saved our home." "We did it," she whispered, managing a tired smile. "All of us together." Rhea threw her arms around her sister, and Robert gathered them both close. The preacher laid his hands on their shoulders in a silent blessing, while the judge looked on with approval. "Let's get you girls somewhere quiet to rest," Robert said, noting Sasha's exhaustion. "Been quite a day." The crowd parted respectfully as Robert wheeled Sasha out of the saloon. The afternoon sun had softened, painting the street in gentle gold. Several townspeople hurried ahead to the boarding house, preparing a room for the family. That evening, as darkness settled over the town, Robert sat in a rocking chair between the girls' beds. Rhea had fallen asleep immediately, worn out by the day's excitement. But Sasha lay awake, her eyes bright in the lamplight. "Robert," she whispered, "Yes, little one. Thank you for being willing to give up everything for us," and Robert reached over to smooth her hair. "Some things are worth more than possessions. Family, for instance." Sasha smiled at the word family and finally closed her eyes. Robert kept his vigil, listening to the girls' peaceful breathing and the quiet sounds of the town settling down for the night. Outside their window, a spring breeze carried the promise of mountain wildflowers soon to come. The battle had been won not through force or money, but through the power of love and community standing together. Robert offered a silent prayer of gratitude as he watched over his sleeping girls, his heart full of the miracle that had brought them into his life and given him a reason to fight for tomorrow. Spring arrived in gentle waves, each day bringing new life to the mountain valley. The last patches of snow melted into crystal streams that fed the awakening earth. Morning frost gave way to tender grass shoots, and buds swelled on the aspen branches. Robert stood on his cabin porch, breathing in the fresh scent of renewal. Behind him, he heard Sasha's wheelchair creak as she rolled out to join him in the dawn light. "Your cheeks have more color," he observed, noting the pink glow that had replaced her winter pallor. Though still thin as a willow reed, her eyes sparkled with renewed energy. "The mountain air," she replied, turning her face to catch the warming sun. "It feeds my soul." Rhea burst from the cabin door, clutching a handful of seed packets. "Can we plant now? You promised we'd plant when the ground got soft." Robert chuckled, running a weathered hand over her eager head. "Reckon it's time. Let me fetch the tools." He retrieved his spade and hoe from the lean-to, along with the wooden markers he'd carved during the winter evenings. Together, they made their way to the small plot he'd cleared beside the cabin. "First lesson in gardening," Robert explained, kneeling beside Rhea in the dark soil. "You've got to respect the earth." He showed her how to dig small furrows with her fingers. "Not too deep now. Seeds need just enough cover to feel safe, but not so much they can't reach the sun." Rhea's tongue poked out in concentration as she carefully placed each seed. "Like tucking them into bed?" "Just like that," Robert agreed, watching as she patted the soil gently over each one. Movement at the edge of the clearing caught his attention. Henry appeared from the tree line, followed by several members of his tribe. They carried bundles of saplings and medicinal plants. "We come to plant along the creek," Henry announced, raising his hand in greeting. "To keep the water pure for all our children." Robert nodded in understanding. Together they had fought to protect this valley. Now they would work together to help it flourish. The day unfolded in shared labor and quiet conversation. The Ute showed Rhea how to recognize healing herbs, while Sasha sketched the wildflowers beginning to dot the meadow. Women from the tribe shared their knowledge of which plants would strengthen the creek banks, working alongside Robert to secure the water's future. As the sun climbed higher, more visitors arrived. The preacher brought bread still warm from his wife's oven. The judge's daughter appeared with jars of preserved fruit. Even some of the miners stopped by, offering to help clear stones from the planting areas. The cabin that had stood silent for so many years now hummed with life. Laughter echoed across the valley as children played. Songs in English and Ute floated on the spring breeze. The aroma of stew bubbling over an outdoor fire mingled with the scent of fresh-turned earth. Robert paused in his work, overwhelmed by the change. For so long, he had wrapped his loneliness around him like a familiar blanket. Now that blanket had been replaced by the warm embrace of community. As evening approached, the visitors gradually departed, leaving behind newly planted gardens and promises to return. Robert built up the hearth fire while Sasha and Rhea sorted the remaining seeds for tomorrow's planting. The flames cast dancing shadows on the cabin walls as they shared a simple supper. Rhea's eyes grew heavy as she listened to Sasha tell stories about the flowers they'd seen that day. Eventually, she crawled into her sister's lap, curling up like a tired kitten. Robert watched as Sasha stroked her sister's hair, humming softly. The firelight caught the tears in her eyes. "What's troubling you, little one?" he asked quietly. Sasha looked up, and to his surprise, she was smiling through her tears. "When I first came here, I was counting days," she whispered, careful not to wake Rhea. "Every sunrise felt like sand slipping through my fingers. But now," she touched her chest wonderingly, "now I don't feel that anymore. The ticking has stopped." Robert moved to kneel beside her chair. Without words, he took her small hand in his calloused one, squeezing gently. In that touch flowed all the hope and faith he'd found since these two girls had entered his life. Sasha squeezed back, her grip stronger than it had been in months. Together, they sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire paint gold across Rhea's sleeping face, while outside their window, the valley breathed with new life and endless possibilities. The mountain valley settled into a gentle rhythm as predictable as the sun crossing the sky. Each morning, Robert rose before dawn, moving quietly through the cabin so as not to wake the girls. He would step out onto the porch, breathe in the crisp air, and thank the Lord for another day with his newfound family. Rhea was always the next to wake, padding around in her wool stockings to help with morning chores. She had learned to feed the mule without fear, stretching up on tiptoe to pour oats into the wooden trough. Robert watched with pride as she checked the water barrel, making sure it was full and clean. "Much obliged for your help, little one," he would say, and Rhea would beam at the praise. Sasha preferred the quiet of mid-morning when sunlight streamed through the cabin windows. Her wheelchair had worn smooth paths between the table and the porch, where she spent hours sketching the changing mountain views. Her drawings captured everything from darting hummingbirds to the way shadow and light played across the distant peaks. One bright morning, Robert and Henry began marking the ground for a second cabin. The sound of axes rang through the trees as they felled straight pines and stripped their branches. "My people will come more often now," Henry explained, notching a log with practiced skill, "to tend the creek plants and share stories with the children." Robert nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. "Reckon it's right to have a proper place for them to stay." The work went quickly with Henry's knowledge of Ute building methods combined with Robert's frontier skills. Sasha wheeled out to watch their progress, offering encouragement and occasional suggestions about where to place the windows. Afternoons found Sasha and Rhea at the table, heads bent over books. Robert had saved a few primers from his wife's teaching days, and Sasha proved to be a patient instructor. Her clear voice guided Rhea through the alphabet, praising each small victory. "Look, Robert," Rhea would call out, holding up her slate, "I wrote my name all by myself." Robert's heart swelled at these moments, remembering how his wife had dreamed of teaching their own children someday. Though that dream had died with her, here it lived again in a different form. The valley flourished under their care. Gardens sprouted in neat rows, tended by both settler and Ute hands. The creek ran clear and strong, its banks secured by native plants. Even the wild creatures seemed to sense the peace of the place, with deer grazing unafraid near the cabin at dusk. One evening, as shadows lengthened across the valley, hoofbeats announced the arrival of circuit preacher Elijah. His saddlebags bulged with books, and his weathered face broke into a smile at the sight of the family gathered on the porch. "Brought something special," he announced, producing several worn hymn books. "Thought you might enjoy some singing." Rhea clapped with delight while Sasha wheeled herself closer. Robert lit extra lanterns and brought them outside, their golden light creating a warm circle in the gathering dusk. The preacher opened his book and began to sing in a clear tenor voice. Robert's deeper tones joined in, remembered words rising from years of silence. Sasha's sweet voice lifted in harmony, while Rhea did her best to follow along. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. The familiar hymn floated across the valley, drawing Henry and 2 Ute women from their nearby camp. They sat respectfully at the edge of the lantern light, listening to the blend of voices. One song led to another as evening deepened into night. The preacher taught them new hymns, and Sasha quickly learned the harmonies. Even Henry joined in on the choruses he knew from mission services. Robert found himself transported back to evenings with his wife, when they would sing together by candlelight. But this time, the memories brought comfort instead of pain. The music seemed to weave past and present together, creating something new and precious. As the lanterns burned low, Rhea dozed off in Robert's lap. Sasha's voice had grown tired, but her face glowed with contentment. The preacher closed his book, offering a quiet prayer of thanks for their gathering. In the peaceful silence that followed, Sasha reached for Robert's hand. "This feels like forever," she whispered, her words carrying all the weight of a sacred promise. Robert squeezed her fingers gently, understanding exactly what she meant. Here in this valley, with these people, they had found more than just a home. They had found the kind of peace that settles deep in the soul and takes root, like the strongest mountain pine. The lanterns flickered one by one, but no one moved to relight them. Some moments deserved to fade naturally into the sweet darkness of memory, held forever in the heart. Late summer brought golden light to the valley, but with it came an unexpected trial. The creek's song grew quieter day by day as the water level dropped. Robert noticed it first during his morning checks, the way stones that had been underwater now gleamed dry in the sunlight. "Never seen it this low this time of year," he muttered, running calloused fingers through his beard. Henry appeared beside him, silent as a shadow. "The corn leaves curl," he observed, gesturing to their shared fields. 2 days more without water, and we lose much." Robert straightened his back, squinting at the cloudless sky. The sun beat down mercilessly, turning the valley into an oven by midday. Their carefully tended crops drooped in the heat, leaves wilting despite the morning dew. "We'll dig channels," Robert decided. "Bring what water there is where it's needed most." They gathered their tools, shovels, picks, and Henry's traditional digging stick, worn smooth from years of use. The work was backbreaking under the burning sun. Sweat soaked through their shirts as they carved shallow trenches from the creek's remaining flow toward the neediest crops. Sasha insisted on being wheeled out to watch despite the heat. Robert tried to convince her to stay in the cooler cabin, but she remained firm. "I need to see," she said, her voice thin but determined, "and I need to pray." Robert positioned her wheelchair in the shade of a pine tree where she could observe their labor. Rhea brought her water in a tin cup, hovering nearby with worry in her young eyes. As Robert and Henry dug, Sasha's clear voice carried across the parched earth. "Dear Lord," she prayed, "you made these mountains and this valley. You know what we need. Please send rain to nourish what we've planted together." Hour after hour they worked to redirect the precious water. The sun climbed high, then began its descent. Still, Sasha prayed, her words becoming a gentle backdrop to their labor. By evening, dark clouds began gathering over the western peaks. Robert paused in his digging, hope rising as he watched them build. Henry stood beside him, both men scanning the sky with desperate attention. The first drops fell just as dusk settled over the valley. Light patters quickly grew into a steady drumbeat of rain. Robert helped Sasha onto the porch, where she lifted her face to the life-giving water, tears mixing with raindrops on her cheeks. Thunder rolled through the mountains as the storm gained strength. Lightning illuminated the valley in brief, brilliant flashes. The rain fell harder, soaking the thirsty earth, filling the creek, and breathing new life into their struggling crops. From the Ute camp came the sound of drums, their rhythm matching the storm's pulse. Henry smiled, explaining, "We give thanks for the blessing of water." Robert lit lanterns and hung them from the porch posts, their golden light creating warm circles in the rain-washed darkness. The drumming grew stronger, and soon Henry's people appeared, moving through the wet night toward the cabin. Settlers from nearby homesteads, drawn by the sound, arrived on horseback. Soon the porch was crowded with people seeking shelter from the rain, while others danced in the downpour, celebrating nature's bounty. Sasha sat in her wheelchair at the heart of it all, clapping in time with the drums. Her face glowed with joy as she watched Rhea twirl in the rain with the Ute children. Robert stood behind her, one hand resting on her shoulder, feeling the rhythm of her clapping beneath his palm. The storm continued through the night, but no one seemed eager to leave. Settlers and Ute alike shared the porch, passing coffee and stories back and forth. The drums never ceased, though their rhythm shifted like the rain itself. Sometimes soft as a whisper, other times bold as thunder. Under the lantern light, Robert watched his unlikely family, settler and Ute, young and old, the strong and the frail, all brought together by hardship and hope. The rain had done more than save their crops. It had strengthened the bonds between them all. Autumn swept across the valley, painting the aspen leaves in shimmering gold and deep orange. The morning air carried a crisp bite that made Rhea's cheeks glow pink as she skipped alongside Robert, who carried Sasha in his strong arms. "Look, blackberries," Rhea pointed to a patch near the trail. Robert carefully set Sasha down on a smooth boulder, making sure she was steady before helping Rhea gather the sweet fruit. Sasha's thin fingers stained purple as she popped berries into her mouth, laughing at Rhea's purple-stained grin. Later that week, they traveled to town for the final hearing. The courthouse felt different now, warmer somehow. Robert stood tall before the judge, his hat in his hands, while Sasha sat straight in her wheelchair beside him. The railroad's lawyer looked sour as the judge spoke the words they'd prayed to hear. "The land rights are hereby granted to Robert Mitchell in perpetuity," the judge declared, his gavel striking with finality. Sasha reached for Robert's hand and squeezed it tight. That evening, the cabin glowed with celebration. The aroma of venison stew filled every corner as they gathered around the table. Robert brought out his wife's old Sabbath lamp, carefully polishing its brass surface before lighting it. He placed it in the window where its warm light spilled out into the gathering dusk. Sasha bowed her head, her whispered, "Thank you, Lord," barely audible but full of joy. The lamp's flame flickered steady and bright, a beacon of hope made permanent at last. Winter settled over the valley like a soft blanket, the snow dusting the pines and coating the cabin roof in white. Inside, the hearth crackled with warmth, casting dancing shadows on the log walls. Though Sasha's head remained bare from her illness, her cheeks glowed with a strength that had seemed impossible months ago. In the evening's quiet, Rhea snuggled against Robert's chest, her small form fitting perfectly in his arms. Sasha wheeled her chair closer to the fire, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Mr. Robert," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "I don't think I have only 3 months anymore." Robert leaned forward, his weathered face gentle but firm. "No, child. You've got forever here, with us." They held each other close, this found family bound by love and faith, while outside the snow fell in peaceful silence. The lamp in the window shone steadily, a warm beacon against the darkness, marking their home and their hope. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.